Welcome to the festival, the 42nd Humana Festival of New American Plays. Thank you for being here. Not only every year do we present the plays, but we also curate a series of keynotes, panel discussions that we hope shine a light on the extraordinary work that's happening in both our industry and the community. Today's no exception, and we're very honored to host a panel of local artists who are making inclusive and accessible work here in Louisville. And to guide us through this, she's sitting right here, is the very wonderful Talleri McRae, who's Actors Theatre's Access, Inclusion and Education Consultant. So please join me in welcoming Talleri.
Thank you. And Les, I have to say, talking about inclusive theater makes me think about moments in my time here and in Les's tenure here where his artistic leadership really led the way. Two productions that I think about in particular are the 2013-2014 production of Our Town that was particularly inclusive in its casting. And I also think about the 2014-2015 season that included the show Tribes. And it's such a great gift that Les Waters is interested in inclusion and diversity and disability as an artist and really leads the way as an artist, because that gives us at Actors Theatre a great guiding light to make inclusive and accessible work on stage as artists, and also to make that space for our audiences. So I'm really grateful, and I think it's really appropriate that Les did the introduction for this particular panel. And I wanted to start off today thinking about that artistic lens, right? So often we think about access and inclusion and disability from a social lens, which is very important, and we'll certainly get to some of the logistics of that. But I think as a community of artists, it's really interesting to think about what makes accessibility and inclusion so artistically interesting, so complex, what that means for us as artists. So I wanted to start with two of my favorite artists. These are young artists that have been part of the Actors Theatre season in the past because they've participated in our New Voices program. And if you're not familiar with New Voices is a program that's really modeled after the Humana Festival, and it offers high school playwrights the opportunity to have fully produced work and to develop their work in a 10-minute play format. So I'm really, really thrilled to introduce to you Emma Morris, who wrote a piece called Space Girl, which was part of the 2014 New Voices Festival, and Jacob Hack, who wrote a piece called The Big Daddy Pop-Tart Booster, which is just as fun as it sounds, that was part of the 2016 New Voices Festival. So help me join and welcome them. Emma, you're a senior at Northern Kentucky University right now.
Yes.
Excellent. And Space Girl was not only produced here at Actors Theatre, it was also produced at the Kennedy Center as part of the VSA Playwright Discovery Program, of which Actors Theatre is a contractor. So this is a really hard question, but I'm just going to jump right in there. Can you describe your play Space Girl in about a sentence?
Just one sentence? Okay. It's a love story between two girls who meet at the bus stop. And that's the most important factor. The reason it was included in this panel, is that one of the girls, Amelie, the main focus of the story, is autistic.
Excellent. Excellent, great. Jacob, can you describe the Big Daddy Pop-Tart Booster in one sentence?
That one might be a little bit hard. Pretty much it's a crazy play where everyone's running around doing crazy things.
That is a very accurate description of that play. For those of you in the audience that are wondering, there will be some supplemental materials that we'll send to you electronically. You can have links to YouTube to watch both of these plays, and there are some production photos as well that you can take a look at. So I'm curious to hear from each of you, what was your inspiration for writing the plays that you did? And I'm also interested about what you had to say. One of the things we talk about with all of the New Voices participants here at Actors Theatre is what their play says about the world. So I'm interested in the inspiration for your play, what you think your play might say about the world, and if there are any connections that has to do with disability and inclusion. So, Emma, did you want to go first?
Sure, I will speak first. To tell everyone in this room something I've never told anyone. I wrote Space Girl in a day, the day it was due. It was a class assignment. No one else knows this. You are not the only people who know that this award-winning play I wrote was literally written in 2 hours on a library computer at my high school. Which I think is part of the tributes to its success, because I had been trying to write a play previously, and it just sucked. Honestly, it sucked. And then I was like, okay, so what's the story I want to read? Because that's the easiest way to start writing, is what's something I want to read? And I was like, okay, what do we not have enough of? We don't have enough just genuinely sweet gay love stories, where everyone is happy, nobody dies, there's no tragedy or heartbreak. And so I said, so let's write that. And then I wasn't getting anywhere with that, because that's really too broad. And I was like, okay, well, I am disabled myself. I want my main character to be disabled. Because a lot of times when we hear, especially in the popular media about disabled people, any disabled love story is the disabled person needs to be fixed. There's something wrong with them, and that the person who loves them is loving them despite their ability, not with their disability. And that is just, it's honestly hurtful. I am who I am, and my disability is a part of me. It's not something I'm burdened with. It's not something that is difficult for me to deal with. It's something I've always had. I don't know what my life is like without it. It's made me who I am today. So I wanted a story then in which I had a character who was disabled, and who that was just something that she was. And there was no loving her despite this. There was no hardship or anything. It was just acceptance. A sweet story of love and acceptance. And so in those 2 hours, I, crapped out a first draft, and I read it, and I was like, well, this is actually pretty good. And I submitted it, and I was like, okay, let's see what, and then everyone was like, oh, this is so good, you've done something wonderful. And I was like, I just wrote a story I wanted to hear.
And to your credit, you did some really beautiful work in developing that play throughout the process. So
It's 1 2-hour session.
I mean, it was really good to start, absolutely, and it grew from there. So that's important to know too. The other thing I love about that play is that the main character is on the autism spectrum, and there's a stereotype of people with autism that they have a hard time with relationships. And this was a play about 2 girls that were actually both really good at relationships, and I loved that was also part of the story. Jacob, tell us about the inspiration for the Big Daddy Pop-Tart booster.
That's going to be really hard to top off what she said. So essentially, mine was also a class assignment, and I wasn't sure so much about writing a play at the time. And I was sitting at home, took a nap, and fell asleep, and had a dream. And it all comes out from this dream where I have really crazy dreams. And in this dream, there was these Pop-Tarts, I don't know why, but the Pop-Tarts shooting out of the Pop-Tart booster, falling from the sky, and they're flaming. And so then, after having that dream, I went back to class, and the person working with us on these plays was like, you write whatever you want. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna write something, and I'm gonna have the actors do the craziest things I can think of. And yeah, so that's how that happened.
I think at this juncture, it's important. I asked all of the panelists to provide a bio for me, and Jacob's bio tells you a little bit about himself, but also a little bit about his prowess as a playwright. So if it's okay with the rest of the panel, I'd like to read it verbatim. Jacob Hack is a jiggling ball of fun originating from Butler County. After an unexpected and swift application of a stray pellet to the eyeballs, he vacated his home school to attend the School for the Blind, which Jacob's people call KSB, the Kentucky School for the Blind. He is a senior in high school and prays that one day very soon he will graduate and move on to the big leagues of college. Afterward, Jacob plans living out his final days in seclusion, enjoying fine blueberry pie. so picture that on stage for about 12 minutes and you'll have a good sense of the So having these two playwrights here, fine playwrights of the present and we hope of the future, we have a really rare opportunity here, which is that we are in a room full of theater makers that represent artists and companies and organizations from all over the country and really all over the world. So the last question I have for this section of the panel before we move on to talk to some other folks that I've gathered here is I want to know if there's anything that you want to say or share with this fine group of people that they can take back with them.
I wasn't informed I was going to have to answer such a heavy question.
Jacob, any words of wisdom?
I was informed, but I'm still thinking, so
I can spit off something real quick. I think the most important thing is never put on a disabled play. We all know those plays, and they are the disabled plays. They are about characters with disabilities, and the entire play is about this character and their disability. Those plays suck. They are bad, and I want them to be eradicated from this earth, because nothing is worse than, like, watching a TV show about somebody with depression, and that's the story. The story is this person is sad. That is not true to life. I do have very, very severe clinical depression, and my life is not about depression. My life is me living it, and the depression is also there. You know, it's a monster in a room, but if we make the play about the monster in the room, that's a terrible play. You know, it is important for theater to focus on characters, and all these characters and their stories, not just what they are.
All right, Jacob, last chance for now, but you'll have a chance to come back before we all break, so you don't have to worry about it if you're not feeling particularly.
I'll be smart at the end of the play.
Okay. So stay tuned for Jacob Hack's words of wisdom for the room. Stay tuned. For the next portion of the panel, I'm going to ask David and Darren to join us towards the front. So Emma and Jacob, if you want to leave your mics on the chair, and we'll just kind of do a little do-si-do here. Darren, you got it? Yep, scooting over this way, Darren. And David, just go ahead and come closest here. There's one more chair over, Darren. For you. There we go. Nice. That was a smoother transition than I thought it was going to be. That was all of you looking good. So the next portion of this panel, I wanted us to talk directly to performers with disabilities, because I think many organizations that I work with as a consultant have the desire to be more inclusive, but they're not actually sure what that looks like day to day in their theater. They're not sure what that does to their production calendar, to their rehearsal calendar, to their audition process. So I thought it would be really great to just talk to a couple of performers that have done some work locally here in the Louisville area and ask them about what helps them succeed and what can make an audition, a rehearsal, a performance accessible for them. So the first panelist that I'm going to ask is David DeSanctis, and David is a performer here in Louisville. He's done some work behind the camera in film. A feature film that you might recognize him from is called Where Hope Grows. And he also does work, in addition to performing, he does work as a speaker as well in this area and other regions as well. So we'll welcome David in just a moment. And our second panelist is Darren Harbour. In addition to being a good friend and colleague, Darren also works for several different performing companies throughout Louisville. He just finished a performance with the Braille Readers Theater, which is a company that works out of the American Printing House for the Blind, which is here in Louisville. He's also the founder, producer, and director for Imagine Blind Players, which is going into its third season, and that's a theater company here in Louisville for performers who are blind and have other disabilities, and they have a goal of doing fully staged work. He's also done work with several different theater companies around town with Looking for Lilith Theater Company, and he's in a show right now that he can tell you a little bit more about as well. But those we're going to spend some time with David and Darren. So David, I'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about the accommodations that you need when you're performing?
Yes. Buying is There are no special physical accommodations that I need because I process things in my own mind a little slower than some people.
So when you're auditioning, you need a little bit of extra time sometimes?
Yes, and I also might need a little more time than a typical person would before the same task.
Okay, okay. When you were filming Where Hope Grows, did you work with the production crew and the director to make sure you had the time you needed in between scenes, for example?
Yes,
Okay.
we did a lot of dance breaks back then.
Dance breaks.
Yeah, I came up with playlists of different themes that I had taken from the different scenes of the movie. So yeah.
So having the playlists and having your dance breaks, did that kind of help you know what scene you were about to work on next to kind of get you in the mood?
Yes, that is exactly correct. And also, the other break that I love, besides the dance break, is the craft services, the food.
You are not alone, David. Excellent. Darren, can you talk about some of the accommodations that you need when you're auditioning and rehearsing?
Yes, I can. Hello, everybody. A lot of times going into an audition is pretty frightening. I'm typically the only person who is blind or visually impaired that goes in. And what my theater company is all about is finding these accommodations and nuances and how we can make theater accessible to us so that we can fully stage it. So I have, over the years of constant auditioning, a lot of it is me jumping right in the director's face and being like, hey, look, we need to talk about this. So communication. Communication is the forefront. You cannot and should not and ever not label one disability and then all those accommodations fit under one. So you really want that individual relationship with that auditioner to have understanding to what their needs are. So that could mean calling ahead of time and talking with, who knows the ins and outs of how the audition process is going to go, asking if I can be sent the email of the monologue that you would like performed so that I can have time to get familiar with it, or may I perform a monologue that I already have prepared that's somewhat in the genre of said play or performance. A dance audition, I've done some dancing as well. I might say, can I get there early before everybody else piles in so I can feel around the stage, which is also something I do in theater as well. I want to get here early, I want to know where the sets are, I want to be here when the designers are here so that I have the visual layout in my head and map of what the stage is. So time would definitely be a reasonable accommodation, but communication, I would say, is the forefront. Transportation as well. I do believe being on time is very important. I know sometimes in theater we have like a 15-minute grace, and that to me is theater to theater. You can't throw a stick at either one because everybody does things a little bit differently. But I take the initiative to buddy up with somebody in the cast and say, hey, look, I live over here. You anywhere that direction? I'm riding with you. How you doing? And so I do a lot of making the accommodations for myself, but I would like to see theater companies trying these things out and starting those conversations with said disabled person auditioning, because some people are shy. I apparently am not. Some people may have not had as much practice with self-advocacy, and then there's the feelings of, hey, what if after I give them these accommodations and the things I need, that makes them more discouraged to cast me. That's a fear as well. So being able to be the administrator starting that conversation will relieve a ton of anxiety.
Yeah, Darren and I have talked about before, there's already a power dynamic when an actor's going in for an audition. So if your theater company can be proactively welcoming and proactively communicative about the options, the reasonable options that your theater company can provide, that's going to help, that's going to go a long way with that performer feeling comfortable asking for what they need. And that's just part of the conversation. Darren, the other thing that we've talked about logistically is the space between a general audition and a callback. And you talked about that a little bit when you were talking about auditions. But tell me more about the kind of preparation. If you want to be seen for a specific role, tell me a little bit more about your preparation process so that this room can understand how for you, again, because it's an individual thing, for you, how that kind of additional time is used.
Thank you. It definitely is a process. I found a love for the process because like any other homework you got to do, and I'm sure the students back here understand, you better make it fun because it's got to get done, right? So I go in for an audition, and the first thing I'm thinking is, do I have to perform this monologue? I could come in with the monologue that I already got, but I don't want to do that because I want to let them know that I can fulfill the role that they're auditioning for, that that I may want to do or what they see me for. They may not get what they need out of me for the audition that I got prepared. So I call them, I'm like, hey, what's up? I'm blind, I want to come in and audition. Don't be discouraged, I can work the stage. Send me an email of the monologue. I read the monologue. Already I'm at a disadvantage because I'm having to almost memorize the monologue before the audition, which means you can't fully put your full acting foot into it. And then you don't want to paraphrase because that's unprofessional as well. So then the next thing I do, I'll say, well, I'm going to feed the information into my phone. I'm not an avid Braille reader. I lost my sight later on in life. Whenever I want to write something down, I literally write it in the air because I still know what letters look like. So I email it to myself and I format my document in such a way where it reads and feeds into my ear. This is still a slower reading process, and sometimes the phone messes up, your mom sends you a text message right in the middle of it. That was funny. And that's my audition, the phone goes dead, the Wi-Fi doesn't work, something along those lines can happen. But if I'm reading it straight through as a monologue, I have a much cleaner chance of getting it done. So then you say, oh, you want to come for a callback? And I'm like, oh, great, I'm coming back for a callback. And then I'm like, oh, crap, I'm coming back for a callback. Because the callback means they're going to pair me with somebody else in the audition because they want to hear how we dialogue together. So now I have to go back, get back on the computer, reformat the document again, put the cue lines in from the other person that I have to audition with, not knowing who I'm going to audition with at what time or what said scene. So then the director's like, okay, Act 2, Scene 3, and I'm like, crap, I already have Act 1, Scene 1 loaded up. So now I gotta go, so can you give me a minute? So already it's slowing down, the sound of the silence is making my heart pound, my blood pressure is going up, and I'm like, crap, they gotta wait for me, they're gonna think this is how it's gonna be for the rest of these 6 weeks. They don't, and it just becomes this overwhelming thing. Now don't get me wrong, I keep a smile when I sweat, but I don't want somebody else to get the idea or to assume that this is going to be an issue because it's not something that they used to. So it makes auditioning very difficult, and then never minding the questions of how is he going to get here, how is he going to get around the stage, do I have to minimize his blocking, and all this is just for the verbal stuff, which we kick butt at, but it makes it more of a struggle. So it's a long process. Knowing as much ahead of time as possible is going to be the forefront, and yeah.
Thanks, Darren. I don't think theaters need to know every single in and out of how it takes performers with disabilities to prepare, but just knowing that extra time and that extra communication is really valuable to them and really helps make a process that would be pretty inaccessible if it was done in a traditional way, accessible to them. Is really useful. I also think Darren and I have talked about, which happens a lot of times, I know, at this level of casting, but checking in with another company that's worked with a performer and can tell you a little bit more about what that process is like later in the rehearsal process or during performance can help you get a good sense, because again, sometimes just fitting into the requirements of that audition process is the most inaccessible part of it. And if you can kind of get past that initial barrier, you've got a lot more space to work with and wiggle room to work with. Great. So I'm going to ask the two of you the same question that I asked Jacob and Emma, which is, we are in a room full of theater makers from all over the country and the world. I'll start with you, David. Is there anything you want people in this room to know?
Yes, I do. All of us with our differing abilities still have the same needs and desires that all of you do. We all want the same fulfillment in our careers and our lives. Please give us the same considerations and opportunities that you would give any typical person.
Thank you. Darren?
Yes, and David, yes, I co-sign all the way. I was sitting back there listening to Emma and Jacob, and I don't know if anybody noticed or not. I can feel the heat from these lights, so it might have been pretty reflective, but there was a tear rolling down my face. And it was a tear rolling down my face because this is something that's actually happening. I wasn't born blind. We didn't know that this would be a condition. So when it occurred, all the questions arise of what are you going to do now? You know, you have to face this thing. Your life is going to change. And our lives don't necessarily change. It's still living life, which is a lot to what Emma said. It's still a life to live, and we all have hiccups and bumps in the road along the way. I find that what makes it challenging is not necessarily having the disability, but other people not having the awareness of said disabilities and already having a skewed idea. So my biggest, I guess, inspirational message I would like to send out, and my stage name is The Inspirer, is to really open all of your eyes. There is no such thing as something that you don't know, because you don't know what you don't know until you figure it out and you know it. So open all of your eyes and encourage other people to open all of their eyes too. There's always something to learn, something to gain, and somebody to reach out to and connect with. So that's my message.
Thanks, Derrick. I have to say, before we move to the next section of our panel, that I feel really lucky to have relationships with members on the panel and also some members that are here in the audience today, because whenever something is called to question for me, if I'm reading a new play and I'm not sure if a representation feels authentic, if it's kind of on the line of what Emma was talking about, where I'm not sure that the aspect of disability is really realistic or complex enough or paradoxical enough, I have a community that I can turn to and say, how do you feel about this? How does this strike you? Because my experience is only one experience, and I think having as many different voices and points of view as you're navigating a new topic like this has been really valuable to me. So thank you, David. Thank you, Darren, for that. We're going to go ahead and swap out just a little bit. David, you can stay right where you are. Darren, I'm going to have you scoot to the back row, and I'm going to have Jacob and Kyrstin and Bill join us in the front row. So we'll do a little do-si-do here. Thank you, Darren. There we go. There. I thought for the third section of our time together, I know that many people in this audience might not have a direct identity or a direct connection with the disability community from personal experience, but all of us can be allies and can make spaces more accessible. And so I invited Bill and Kyrstin to come here because both of them have worked in that capacity in terms of advocating for artists with disabilities. And so this is really the nuts and bolts logistics piece of the chat, which is one of my favorite things to think about, again, because all of us kind of philosophically are on the same page, I think. Many of us are, but we're not always sure what that looks like. So, Bill, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about the ways in which you have been able to offer some support for David as he navigates his work as a performer. And then, Kyrstin, I'm going to have you just talk a little bit as Jacob's English teacher about how you support the work that he's done as a playwright, and also because Actors Theatre is a contractor with the Kennedy Center and the Office of Accessibility there, you've actually worked with several playwrights over the years. So Bill, did you want to go first?
The main thing with David, because we weren't into the acting world until he got this role in this movie, was that we really didn't know what to do either at the beginning. But with the help of the director and the producer of his movie, they asked us a lot of questions about what do we need accommodations. And as David said, we don't really need physical accommodations because he can do all of that. It was just the processing. Sometimes in giving him time to maybe when he would come to a wall, how to maybe refocus. And that was the way he referred to earlier. The music was it. If he got to the wall, like a lot of actors and actresses do, then they gave him a 2-minute, 3-minute break. They put some music on that he had already picked out. They had to do with the scenes. It helped him refocus, and he was back with everybody else. And all the other actors that he worked with during that movie said, ooh, that's a great idea, we need to do that too. You know, because it helps them process things and get everything back focused to where they want to go. And so they enjoyed it too. And even sometimes, like he said, when they got the music going, he would dance because he loves to dance. And they participate in the dancing. And if you ever see his movie or go out and see any of the extras in the movie, a lot of the breaks, they were dancing. The other actors, even the cast and the crew. I mean, the crew was dancing with them. So it was a way for them to sort of release and refocus. And that's something that I think everybody needs, not just people with special needs. So that was part of what we learned about getting him more prepared, so to have him some way to release and then come back. Another thing that we have found out through the whole process too is that, like I think Darren said, that having the script ahead and having the whole process of being able to really focus on memorizing it and having it memorized in his process, his way, was something that he needed, because he couldn't ad-lib quite as quickly as some of the other people. Even though he does ad-lib a lot, especially in his speeches, but with the script and keeping the feel of the play or what the playwright wanted, or the writer wanted, he would need to have that. And so they did give him the script ahead of time and work with it with us a lot. So that was very, very helpful.
Anything to add, David?
Yes. He skipped out 2 other things besides music for breaks. One of them is the food, and the other one is the ladies.
Those are important things to talk about on set, because there's a lot of things that happen on set, right? When you think about it in terms of all the different layers of what might be going on. So part of the advanced communication is also communicating what behavior is expected of everybody on set, right? Of other cast members, of crew, and what that looks like. Because I think sometimes we can forget all of the unspoken rules that exist. And part of opening up your doors and making your work more accessible is just knowing yourself better as an organization and knowing how to articulate. Actually, we've never said this before, but one of the rules about coming to Humana is this, that kind of thing. So that's really helpful. Thanks, David. Kyrstin, do you want to talk a little bit about the accommodations that you work with?
Well, so I guess to frame this, I didn't come to this profession thinking, I'm going to teach blind children. It was kind of a random occurrence that it happened this way, and I think often we think from our own experience, and we don't, even if philosophically we think about other people, we don't often put ourselves in other people's shoes. And so when I started this job, the principal at the time said, oh, you'd be great, you should apply. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think getting into working with children who are blind and visually impaired, every person that I encounter says, how do you do that? How do you do that? And I'm like, well, I don't know, same way you do it with anybody else. And so I think that that's the important thing to do, or the important mental space to be in, is to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I think that what I do all day long is think about how is the material that I'm presenting going to be received. And so that's the shift, because I think that usually we're in our own heads and we're thinking about, okay, how does this affect me? How am I going to learn this information? But I think the biggest shift for me in terms of teaching my students is, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be teaching. This is what we need to know. How are all of these kids, who are all individuals, who all experience the world a different way, how are they going to receive this information? And I think that that's the biggest piece of what I do all day long, is sit and think, okay, this is what I need to do. How do I get from point A to point B?
So this is a loaded question, because I've been working with you for 3 years as the teaching artist, but what does a playwriting residency look like in your classroom?
Wild. No, it's really fun, but one of the things, I mean, I have had multiple teaching artists come into my room, and I really love when Talleri comes because she also thinks from that perspective of how are other people interpreting the world. And so one of the things that we really, an example I guess of this is we were writing plays and last year, and my kids were like, okay, we've got this play, and Talleri and I looked at all of these plays, and there was a lot of great things happening, but the formatting was a nightmare. And so then having
The visual
kids go,
formatting on the
yes,
page, like
yes,
the
yes.
words were everywhere.
Yeah, and so then having kids go back and revise 10 pages, 12 pages of paragraphs or weird, like, here's the actor's name, left aligned, and the dialogue is centered. Like, there were all of these weird, like, crazy ways that the kids had decided to do it because Talleri and I didn't tell them this is how you're supposed to do it. So going through 10 pages of that was super exhausting, kind of alluding to what Darren was saying. The amount of work that was required was a lot. And so the kids were finally like, do you mind if next year when we do this, you could just tell us how to do this beforehand so we don't have to do all this work? And we were like, oh yeah, and that's a great idea.
Well, and that was my fault because I was like, we don't want to stop their flow of their ideas. We want them to get them all out on the page, and then they did, and it was really hard to read. And we were like, we want you to get your ideas out on the page, but in this way. And that's what we do with when we work with students who are sighted. But I doubted myself in being able to teach formatting in that way. So that was a learning moment for me too. Jacob, anything to add in terms of how what the playwriting process was like in Ms. Price's class?
I relate to the formatting. I was kind of the same way with getting my stuff. Like, I think I had half my stuff on the right side of the page and half of it on the other side. I think for me though, I just talked to the teacher at the time, and he kind of went over with me how to format it and things like that.
Great, and I know that in other residencies that we have, it makes sense sometimes to have a scribe that knows a little bit more about formatting, so the playwright can really focus on that. It's really interesting, Kyrstin, because Actors Theater has had an ongoing relationship with the School for the Blind and with your students, that the invitation is set every year, that the students have the option to write about the disability experience. Will you talk a little bit about the range of plays that we get at the School for the Blind each year?
So this year, actually, we participated and we had plays about love, plays about friendship, plays about death, plays about family trauma, but not ever, like, kind of going back to what Emma said, not ever plays about disability. We've had plays that touch on disability, that have characters who are disabled, but never plays about disability. And I remember one of the first residencies that we participated in, we talked about, you know, the VSA is funding us and we need to include disability in our plays. And I think that those plays weren't as good as some of the other plays that we have had students do. And I think that's because we get too focused on this has to have something to do with disability, when disability is an experience that is very natural for the people who are experiencing it. It's their experience, and when we're trying to recreate it in a way that's not authentic, it doesn't turn out well, as Emma was saying. So I think we have a vast array of topics that my students write about, and even if disability is included, it's never about disability.
And that was a revision that we gave feedback to the Kennedy Center and the Office of Accessibility, and we said, instead of it being required, can it be an invitation? And so that let your students decide how much about their disability they wanted to be part of the story. And it is worth noting that actually one of Kyrstin's current students is a finalist in the Playwright Discovery Program. She'll be going to Washington, D.C. In the middle of April She wrote a beautiful play. Again, the characters aren't dealing directly with disability, but the world she created in the play is really interesting. It is a world of darkness in which the people in that world that have the highest status are those who are born blind, and those who are born sighted are almost second-class citizens. So she created a play with that world in mind, but that is about as much as disability comes into the world of that play. Great. Well, before we turn it out to the community, I wanted to see, Kyrstin or Bill, if you had anything, again, to share with the room of theater makers that we have here.
One of the things that's happened this year that I thought was in the right direction finally is that the Casting Society of America had an open day for people with inclusion and diversity. So they had one day this year that the casting people throughout the United States in 10 different cities had anybody with any kind of disability come and show their talents. And they're going to try to continue doing that at least every 6 months, they said. But that's something finally in the right direction, because now the people with disabilities can get their videos out there to other people, and people, when they're looking for people for plays or for movies, or the TV shows, can honestly see who can do what. And,
Dave, did you say or reality shows?
Yes, and also reality TV shows, because it's back to the drawing board for me.
Right.
And another thing is that we're seeing more in TV that people with disabilities are being included in the regular TV shows in a regular way, not as a special person or something that's focused on them or their special needs. And that's what we need to see more in theater and also in movies. TV is going in the right direction the last 4 or 5 years, I think, but we don't see it very much in theater, and I don't see it very much in movies. I mean, David was the first IDD person that we know of in the United States that had a lead role in a movie.
Co-lead.
Co-lead, okay. It wasn't a documentary, but this is just a regular movie, and he was just a regular person that hadn't had special needs in the movie. And it did portray him having special needs. He's just a person in the movie. So that's what we need to see more of, because in real life, that's the way it is. It is Emma so clearly stated, and we need more playwrights like Emma because most of the people who are writing the plays or writing the scripts really don't know how to portray people with special needs. They come out awkward, they come out showing them differently, as not just as people. And that's what we need, just regular society where people with special needs fit in a regular society like they should be.
If you're looking for a model of that, the ABC show Speechless does a pretty fantastic job of including disability and that experience without making it the focus of every episode. It is also wickedly hilarious, and it uses all kinds of disability humor that isn't usually shared with the non-disabled world. Sometimes I'll watch that show and I'm like, oh no, they told that secret. Darn, it's out there. But one of the reasons that show is so successful is that they intentionally include in their casting and in their writer's room people from the disability community, and that makes a huge difference. Huge difference. Kyrstin, anything to add?
I would like to add an addendum to what Darren said about communication. I think communication is tremendously important in all relationships. But I think to add to what Darren said, direct communication. Never make assumptions about what a person can or can't do. And just because you've worked with one person who's blind or visually impaired doesn't mean that that person is going to experience the world in the same way as another person who's blind or visually impaired. And I think that lots of times my population of students gets lumped together, and they are as individual and unique as they could possibly be. And they all experience the world in a different way. And you know, when I tell people that I work at the School for the Blind, one of the assumptions that is typically made is that none of my students can see anything. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. Blindness exists on a spectrum, and some people have pretty good vision at our school, and some people have no vision at all. And so I think each of those people has a different way of encountering the world, and being really direct as a theater company, as a director, and asking those questions that are sometimes really tough about what accommodations do you actually need. Because as Darren said, each individual person has a different level of comfort with self-advocacy and with having that type of conversation, but all of the people who I know who are visually impaired or blind appreciate being acknowledged, and it is one of the disabilities that is oftentimes you're able to see it, but we often don't address that elephant in the room and say, hey, I noticed that you have that white cane, I noticed that you're wearing sunglasses, I noticed that you might need extra accommodations, what can I do to help you? And I think that would go a long way in making people who are blind and visually impaired and others with disabilities feel more included.
Great. Jacob, anything to add?
No, just convert. I'm kind of with her where you have to, some people will see me they have experience with talking to people with maybe a cane, and they might have had some vision, and then they give me like a piece of paper in large print, like they do this a lot at school, and I have to talk to them and tell them that I can't see anything, that I might need that in like a digital format or something like that.
Right, so having that back and forth about what you need is great. I want to make sure we have some time to check in with the community that's here. So I'm going to stand up. Emma, feel free to join us at the end here, and then Darren, come this way. I've got a chair right over here for you. I want to see if there are any questions or comments from the audience. And I want to start particularly friends that are here from the disability community, if you wanted to get started or have the first opportunity to talk. I know I always learn when I listen again directly and have that back and forth directly with that community. So feel free to raise your hands. We've got a couple of mic runners in the space that can come get questions. If you've got questions, comments, ways to further the conversation, things you're thinking about. Yeah, Cody, right down here. Betsy's on her way, Cody.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Cody. I'm in the disabilities community, and I'm a magician who shows about me being on the autism spectrum. And a big question in the theater community is whether non-disabled actors should play disabled characters. What are your all's thoughts on that?
Sorry, I don't want to knock you over.
I would get up.
I get asked this by every director that I've come in contact with, and it's this very paced question. So, we want you to do this role, but do you want the role played as a blind person? Do you want to play it as a person who's not blind? And I kind of like to watch the struggle, I will admit. But I don't want to impose on the artistic vision of said show. The show is already kind of laid out. There's a script, the playwright wrote it this way, and so with my company, I figure out different ways to make the role accessible to them without throwing a cane on this character who didn't have one before. And you judge that based off of the characteristics of said character. So if this character mentions anything about driving in the play, obviously it's not going to be a blind person. We don't have automatic cars yet, But if my actor or your actor is blind and they do need some form of assistance around the stage, outside of having it memorized and still needing some extra help depending on the map of the stage, you can accommodate it with the costumes. So I played a pompous Boston man in, was it 1929? So I had one of those waist-high canes that was popular in those days, or an umbrella, or if I'm a janitor, I'll have a broom with me, some form of stick or something to kind of guide myself with and work it into the character. I don't always need that, but should I need it, there's a way to do that. If you're a woman, you want to carry this huge handbag so that it bumps into something before you do, and she's knocking stuff over because she doesn't care, that's a character choice. She doesn't have to be blind. This is this woman. This is just who she is. Or the woman that takes her dog everywhere, even though the sign clearly says no dogs allowed. you can do that. You don't have to change the vision. So I don't believe that people with disabilities have to play only people with disabilities. But if there's an opportunity to play a character with a disability that's already written in, then yeah, we should go ahead and take that hat because it's a good opportunity too. So hope that makes sense.
Yes. I'm a big advocate for authentic representation, right? Which is not always the same as accurate representation, but when you're thinking about authenticity, I often think about justice and representation, right? So am I having an overrepresented group play an underrepresented group? And if I am, how can I balance that out in a way that feels like it's just, right? So how can we think about that? Any other responses to a question of casting? No? Do we have any other thoughts or questions from the audience? Right here, sir?
Hello, I'm Mark Holly from St. Louis. And, you know, we've all kind of known people that, I'm a map reader, okay? And some people read maps, they intuitively know where they are. Other people got to have it written out line by line, you know? And if they have a problem getting somewhere, they've got to go back to square one and go back through the line by line. But hands down, the best driving directions we have ever gotten is a couple we know in California, and they're both blind. She wrote down driving directions, and hands down, they were the best ones we've ever had.
I think what I like about that comment, what I like about that comment is we often talk about the adjustments and accommodations that we need that that can sometimes feel like it's adding to a very busy production schedule. And what we don't always talk about, I think, are the benefits of inclusion and what we can get from including performers with disabilities and artists with disabilities in our productions. So that really speaks to, sometimes we don't always talk about the benefits, we talk about what's accessible and what's not. Say it again.
I love that, yes.
Other question? There was another hand a moment ago that went down. Don't be shy. Over here?
It wasn't me, but...
Okay. We'll take it. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Hi, how are you? My name is Patrick Taylor. I'm an actor with Tourette syndrome. I really appreciated your comments on what you'd like to do, your accommodations before going into an audition. I don't really need accommodations either, really, for an audition. But on the other side of it, going to a show, sitting in the audience, I struggle a lot. And I was wondering if there's something, if you all experienced that at all, and if you've had any experiences with certain audiences or had to explain and kind of open that dialogue, like on the other side of the stage, you know? That's it.
Great. Darren, did you want to start us off? Okay.
I love this question because I do love going to enjoy shows as well. I find that with some of us as blind people, we're more verbally expressive because there's not that shared facial expression approval that sighted people have. You know, you can look at your girlfriend next to you and smile because the cute guy went across the stage, and that was enough communication for the two of you to kind of imaginatorily high five, right? But we can't have that. So the whole time we're watching the show, we're leaning over, whispering, you know, oh, those heels, oh, they sound so tall, I hope she doesn't fall, you know, because we're totally giving some, and it's some good commentary. I mean, you really want to sit with us, but for some people it could be kind of annoying, but you got to find your group, right? So I find that when we sit with an older crowd, they do like to talk a little more as well, so it's less annoying for them, right? And then, you know, and as far as having Tourette syndrome, and I'm not fully, you know, aware of the full nature of your Tourette syndrome, but if you were to sit with somebody, you know, closer to the front, sometimes that's okay, depending on how loud you make it. You know, you don't want the actors to hear you, but people that typically sit up front are the ones that have a harder time hearing it too. And just kind of finding, you know, those circles that you fit in with, you know, at the theater. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know that that theaters across the country are thinking about that. In intentional communication with their audiences as well as their artists, right? So oftentimes now that theaters are starting to offer more sensory-friendly performances, the idea of explicitly communicating with the audience what the expected behavior is, and that it's okay to stand up and move around, it's okay to go use the restroom and come back, it's okay to make noise and move in your seat if you need to, is part of that conversation. And I think many theaters around the country are still figuring out, and again, it's like those rules we don't talk about, right, that we expect everyone to know. How can we actually directly communicate those? Anything else, Kyrstin?
I just wanted to speak on behalf of our school. When we come, every year we've come to the New Voices, and in the last couple of years, Talleri has done a really great job of working with the team here at Actors to make it more inclusive for our students. And one of the ways that we've done that is by providing a touch tour. And what that is basically is before the show starts, we get here a little bit before everybody else does, and they bring out some of the elements of the set, some of the costumes, and it's a really fantastic way for some of my students who have little to no vision to kind of get that visual map of what the setting is going to look like in these plays, what the characters are going to be wearing, and I just think that it's a really fantastic thing that Actors does, and we really appreciate that.
I particularly remember doing that when Jacob's play was featured, because trying to explain all of the elements in the world of Jacob's play, because I know your students kept saying, so how do these all connect? And we were like, they don't, but it's all part of it. Did we have another comment from the audience? We've got just a few moments left.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Catherine, and I have a question for Emma. I also struggle with anxiety and depression, and I'm wondering if you feel like your disability, because it's internally based instead of externally explicit, the way many others are, is taken less seriously by people, and how you reconcile that and being an advocate for yourself.
I don't necessarily, I think people don't, when I say very, very severe, I mean, I've been hospitalized on a regular basis for my depression because it's very, very difficult for me at times. A lot of people, when I say I have anxiety and depression, like, oh yeah, you know, I get nervous too, and it's like, no, I wake up in the morning and I immediately go back to sleep sometimes because I can't cope with what's happening in my head. But I think a lot of it is, well, you know, haven't you gone outside? You know, you hear all of those, have you tried exercise? You know, but it's like, I do all that and I'm still sad. I assure you, I'm trying. I don't want to be sad. I think it is hard for people to understand. I've always been included in the disability. There's never been anybody in the disability community who's ever been like, you don't really belong here because your disability is internal. The only people who ever told me that were people who were not disabled, who were like, are you really disabled? And it's like, I don't know, Brenda, I can't get out of bed sometimes. I guess I'm not really able. I think the thing with disability is that it's like my 100% is not a normal person's 100%. My 100% is at best sometimes somebody's 80. And that in adjusting that is different. Like physically, I can get up and I can do things, so I don't have any physical problems, but the motivation, all the things like that are definitely there.
We have time for one last question. If anybody has something burning they would like to say to the group. I don't think the panelists are running away. If you have anything you wanted to come talk about individually, I think we're all here to stay for a moment, but I do want to, I know some people have a show in an hour, so we'll do one last question.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm the costume apprentice here at Actors Theater, and I was just wondering if there's anything about costumes and during fittings that can help actors with disability feel comfortable, or things that you just might not think about that you'd like to know, like people who design to know.
I gotta tell you, you know, it's my favorite part of doing a role is getting in there and getting the costumes and the makeup and learning the set and really getting to color in the entire map of the picture. You are a costume designer. That is your profession. That is what you are knowledgeable about. I didn't study that particular dynamic. I wear the clothes, right? I, as an actor who's wearing the clothes that you have set for me, I want to know and feel and hear your passion for your job that you are adding to this production that makes it one great, fluid production. If you come with that and you're really amped up about how excited you are about this costume and you're describing it to me, and this is the stitching, I put feathers on the end of here, there are these colors specifically to represent this part of this play, and this connects with this and that connects with that. You're given a connection from you to I as co-workers, but also my character to this costume and painting that picture of me. If I can't fully understand what a shaded magenta color is, it doesn't matter, because your passion for it and painting the picture for me is going to really resonate with me. So don't hesitate to let your education and your passion just rain all over that costume and give all the description that you got. If you're excited about it, we're going to be excited about it. It's kind of like comedy. If I think it's funny, you'll think it's funny, as long as I don't laugh at it.
I'm going to add on that too, because that's the same way within the movie with David. A lot of the costume designer and stuff would explain why that costume is for this scene, and it really helped him become more involved in that character, because it explained her passion also.
Betsy Huggins in the back, I know, will you send us off, please? Will you talk just slightly about, I know you directed Big Daddy Pop-Tart Booster when it was here at Actors Theater. Will you talk briefly about the switch from the actors wearing costumes and how you made that accommodation for Jacob as a playwright?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Betsy, I'm the education manager here, and I also had the absolute honor of directing Big Daddy Pop-Tart Booster, one of my favorite plays I've ever worked on. Jacob was pretty explicit in both his writing and in just like the general style of the play, that he wanted people, he wanted to see adults look silly on stage. And we really embraced that in costume design. I hope you take a look at the production photos and the YouTube video. To just kind of see what world the costumers and our wig designer created. Tech was an interesting experience. Like I would say that our whole rehearsal process was just as much a learning experience for me as it was for everyone else on the cast and crew of that show. But for tech, we usually think about tech being a time for the director and designers to really work on the show, and we kind of flipped that on its head. That tech became about making sure that Jacob knew about the costumes, that we had like a full touch tour of our space. Jacob had written a world that had a ball pit. It had a rocking horse with like those wonderful creaky springs. It was a really engaging, active set, and we wanted to make sure that not only was Jacob comfortable and familiar with everything on stage, but also our actors, who, this is probably their first time acting at a show with a nuclear Pop-Tart booster. So myself and my dramaturg, Kyle Whalen, who is an actor with the spirit of a dramaturg, were able to really take our time during tech to make sure that everyone was comfortable and familiar with everything on stage, and that we were constantly communicating with Jacob during the tech process. So he became like our most important voice at the table. That it wasn't just about what the designers needed from tech, it was about what Jacob needed, and how to include him most in realizing the physical world of Big Daddy Pop-Tart Booster.
Can't think of a better way to end this panel for the moment. So I want to thank all of my panelists for being here. I want to thank the artists for your artistry and for being able to share, and for all of you for waking up early on this Saturday morning. Stick around if you have any more questions. Thank you so much.